Naina, thanks for being with us. We always try and get ratings out of people. Were you how happy or satisfied or dissatisfied were you at the end of the day, and what would be the key highlights for you?
Well, for me, the key highlights are that I was probably one of the few voices that was suggesting that there be some reprieve on the fisc and that we don't hold the government to the 3.6% for this coming year, even while they achieve 4.1 for the March that we're in. And I'm glad that they've bitten the bullet on this because, you know, the scam that we inevitably do every year is then we stick all the expenditures of this year into the next year, and this keeps rolling on. It's critical that we kickstart the economy. The money that is available with government is the only way that we can get money into the system because corporates are just over-leveraged right now, as was in fact recognized both by the economic survey and the midterm review by our economic advisor. So I think it is important to recognize that the reprieve that the government has got itself on the fisc, pushing back to the 3% by a year, increasing the fiscal deficit target from 3.6 to 3.9, brings, I think, about a 1.25 lakh crore rupees more into the system. The key is going to be that this money should not be misspent. I think the worry of most people and why this budget may also get negative marks for this particular fiscal deficit reprieve is the fear that it not get spent as it should. There's a promise that it be spent for capex, which is what it's intended for. It must not go into current expenditure. India has one of the worst ratios of capital expenditure to current expenditure. 80% goes into current expenditure, 20% into capital. It should really be the other way around. And if we can correct this and stop shoving expenditures into the next year by giving the government this reprieve, that's great. But I think all of us have to hold the government accountable for this. We want that transparency. We want government to tell us that for what they have intended to. I think the second, which I would again give top marks for, is we finally got the GST on a timeline, a date. Still not enough detail around it in terms of what the rates are going to be, but the commitment to shoot forward as in April 2016, widely expected, but finally, we have the date. So a big plus there. I think a third area, which of course can have other implications, is the cess on coal. But we have a government that is very committed to the green economy. And believe me, if we don't sort out the air we breathe, we are going to be exactly where China is and its cities if we're not there already. So putting the cess on coal, which has been increased substantially and can have implications, yes, for the cost of power, does help renewables because it brings renewables more into play. And the commitment the government has made for renewables needs help. So this cess should go into helping the renewable sector achieve the targets the government has set for solar, for wind, and for whichever other renewables we choose to touch, like biomass. And I think this is an indication of that commitment. The commitment of the electric car is an indication of that commitment. And I really do want to look at more of the detail. I was hoping that we'd see some announcements about the way priority sector lending of banks be permitted to go into renewables, be there. That, of course, can come later as an announcement from the Reserve Bank of India too. But the prioritization of that sector is evident in this budget, and I hope that we will continue to see more announcements in that space. So I give this budget high marks for being realistic, for looking at infrastructure spend as a kickstarting of the economy, for the disinvestments, ambitious target, but it recognizes strategic stake sales along with the equity disinvestments. It approaches the banking sector reform, rapid enough, but at least it's there, setting up of the bureau, ensuring that it is the first step to a holding company. But again, not enough detail on where is the money going to come for the banks in terms of their capital requirements, etc. So directionally, very good. I would say 8 out of 10, but right now limited in detail, not because it's not there, it's probably there in the appendices, but I just haven't had time to look at it.
Right, and then I just wanted to ask you, one of the other big questions that you've been highlighting and others have been talking about is, of course, how actual administration happens, what's the ease of, of how is the government dealing with the private sector? What sort of tax enforcement are we having and issues like that? So some of the steps that have been announced, and especially when it comes to black money, a range of steps, reasonably harsh steps that were announced by the finance minister. How do you interpret those, and do you think those will help in cracking down on black money?
You know, I believe we have done so little to tackle this huge element that we can bring into the economic system, that anything that is, however harsh it may appear, that basically deters people from moving in the direction of concealing of income, where our tax to revenue our tax to GDP numbers are amongst the lowest in the world. If we don't rectify this, we are always going to be where we are. And I think it's very heartening to see these first steps being taken. The onus is on the individual, each of us as citizens of India, to pay our dues. And full disclosure is what is being asked for and requested. I think what again is not clear to me as to when and how this kicks in. So it's very important that it be prospective, and that all efforts be made to ensure that wherever we can bring this money in going forward, rather than spending all our energy chasing, past practice, which we know has been pretty horrendous, is probably the direction to go, so that the collections, the declarations, the transparency with which people file their returns is all known going forward. So reducing cash transactions, pushing money, as was specifically stated, through cards, credit cards, debit cards, all great. I would say, reduce service tax and taxes on these cards so people actually use these more willingly. Real estate, that again directionally, many steps have been taken over the last few years to reduce the cash element there. But we do know that the system is basically, around the real estate and gold deals that happen in the country. So let's catch the sources of where black money is generated. Surely, guys know how it comes, and widen that tax net. So we're not going back hitting the salaried class again and again, and really looking to widen it. We've said this before. I think the measures are a great step in the right direction, but the important thing, as ever, is going to be in the execution. Shouldn't become another Inspector Raj, shouldn't become another FERA raid regime, should be proactive. And of course, the people of India have to ensure that we recognize that paying our taxes is indeed what our citizenship requires us to do. I think while talking about the individual, it's also important to recognize that there is some reprieve for the middle class, particularly in terms of savings for pensions, for health insurance. And while I would have liked to see a little bit more come back in terms of consumption demand to kickstart the economy, because yes, we're getting it hopefully on the infrastructure and capex side, but also consumer-led demand would help.
Right.
The savings going into some of these instruments may add to the feel-good feeling of the individual, where taxes come down, but may not be sufficient to kickstart the economy from a consumer demand-led business. But again, we should look at what that detail means. I think what the finance minister mentioned was that it could be as much as 4,40,000 into the hands of individual taxpayers through some of these additional advantages through pension tax set-offs and health insurance, etc. Which is something to be celebrated.
I think what he was saying was that that's the level at which somebody can avoid paying tax completely. Naina Lal Kidwai, thank you so much for joining us with those perspectives. It's always great to have you with us.